Now that you heard that, I want to thank you all for coming, and if there's any questions about my speech, I'll be glad to answer them. But let's get on. I graduated from Olney High School, and I guess you all know Olney High School, right? I just want you to know I played football, basketball, and tennis, and I played on a football team that never won a game. So that should tell you about my experience as a football player. But after graduating, I went to the University of Pennsylvania University of Pittsburgh for 1 year when I was inducted into the Army. I took my basic training in Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi, and I'm sure you all know where that's at, because I sure didn't know where it was at. Upon completion of my basic training, I was sent to a school in Baltimore, Maryland, where I was taught to operate what we now have. At that time, it was telephone links, and pictures without wire. Now, you can imagine going back into 1943, that was the beginning of what you now have, what goes on today. This equipment that I operated was so important that it was manufactured at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And it was the only time that 3 engineers that were in the Army at the time were relieved of their duty to come back to Fort Monmouth to make sure that these radios were completed for D-Day. I went over on the Queen Elizabeth, and we crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 5 days without an escort. I imagined they were in a hurry to get us there, because when the war was over, they brought me back in a victory ship, and it took me 18 days to come home. We landed in Glasgow, Scotland, and then we were transported by train down to a town called Congleton, Cheshire, which I know you all know about. And from there, we went down to Bristol. Now, I told you about this equipment I was operating. The 4th Signal Battalion never operated as a complete unit. We were all specialists, and we were always detached to different units that needed our specialties. Off the island of England, there's an island called the Island of Wight, and it's spelled W-R-I-G-H-T. You children all know about that, right? Right. Pardon? Right. And the reason that we were on that island was because we were sending messages and hoping that the Germans would pick these messages up. Now, Germany, without a doubt, had one of the greatest armored divisions in the world. It was better than ours. And the only one who controlled it was Adolf Hitler. And you could not move a Panzer division unless he gave the permission. That's true. That is true. He gave the trust. So now you know I'm telling the truth. But anyway, after we sent these messages for a while, my commanding officer told me that my squad was being moved down to Portsmouth, England, where I was going to be attached to the 29th Infantry Division for communication purposes. I arrived in Portsmouth and met the gentleman down there, and they asked me if I had gone over a side of a ship yet, and I told them no. And they told me, don't worry, because tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, we're all going to be practicing. And they loaded me up with 75 pounds of equipment, The most important piece was the radio that I was operating, which weighed about 65 pounds, and the rest of it was made up of my pack, which included over a week's supply of K rations, because we probably were not going to get food for a week until we got off that beach. We were loaded onto the ships, if I remember correctly, it was on June the 4th, and after my practice coming down that morning, I did pretty good, and we were aboard. Now, everybody knows when D-Day was, but the original date of D-Day was when?
December 7th.
Pardon me? June the 5th is correct. But due to the conditions in the channel of rain and winds blowing, it was finally decided that we would go the morning of June the 6th. And again, we took off on these ships, and we got about 3/4 of the way over when the sergeant in charge of the landing craft that I was assigned to approached me and asked me if I would like to sign a dollar bill. And I asked him, why? And he said, well, there's 36 in the landing craft, you're the 36th one, my squad is 35 people, and I had them all sign, it's for good luck and camaraderie. And this is the dollar bill that I signed. If you take this dollar bill out, you will find that there's 36 signatures on it. The top money is invasion money. And that money was given to us because all the money in France was counterfeited by the Germans and etc. And they gave us that money. I guess they thought we were going to Paris and spend it right away. And we had that, and that was what happened. As I said, we went over the side of the ship into the landing craft, and I asked someone here, I know I met a gentleman who was in the submarine corps, and it wasn't him because he was underwater. I'm looking for the guy who was above the water, that was driving the landing craft, because he got instructions on the morning, which was about 6:30 in the morning. We were in the 3rd and 4th wave that went in. The 1st and 2nd wave went in. About 70 to 80% were either killed or wounded. Now, you're talking about a lot of boats out there in the 1st and 2nd wave. We were in the 3rd and 4th wave, and again, we had a lot of soldiers also coming in. We were told not to go out the front of the gangplank because we got instructions that we would go over the side of the ship. I spoke to a few people here that had been to Omaha Beach. I think someone here was last year, and they were with Steve Ambrose's historical tours. Is that correct? Where is that person at? And they were on the trip after my wife and I made the trip. We were on the trip before. I believe you went in September, and I wanted to be on Omaha Beach on June the 6th. So I went on the trip before. And again, it's something that I now can kid about, but it wasn't a joke that day. How many of you seen, I know you all seen, Saving Private Ryan?
That's what it does in time.
If you saw the beginning of that movie, without a doubt, it's probably the best indication of what took place that morning. And you cannot dig a foxhole in the sand. As fast as you dig it, that's as fast as it covers up. If you've been to Omaha Beach, which we had, Where the machine guns were down at the bottom, they have now built a road that goes from Cherbourg up to Calais, France. And the messages that we were sending from the on the right was to tell them that the invasion was going to come from Calais, France, hoping that Hitler would move all the pincer divisions up there. We didn't know what happened with our messages, but when we landed on Omaha Beach, we found out that all of the pincer divisions were moved to Calais, France, and they could not be moved. Otherwise, without a doubt, General Eisenhower only had one plan. Now, when you go into combat, there's usually 2 or 3 plans. If the first one doesn't succeed, you go to the second plan or the third plan. There was only one plan for D-Day. And that plan was to take Omaha Beach. If we didn't take the beach, then we would be driven back into the ocean, and that would have been the back end. As you all know, it didn't happen. Anyway, the only place you could hide was behind wounded soldiers or dead soldiers. Anyway, moving on. About 3:30, the commander who was in charge of the 29th group that I was attached to came up to me and told me to get a hold of the Navy and tell them that they have to move closer to the shore and start firing up at the top of the buff where all the big guns were. And if they didn't do that, we were never going to get off that beach. They moved the ship in, and without a doubt, they start firing up at the top. And again, those people at Omaha got a chance to see. In fact, some of the openings up there still have some of the guns that are still up there right now. And again, by doing that, they were able to open up. And if I remember correctly, we were finally able to start to get off the beach, I guess around 4 to 5 o'clock that day.